හරිම සුමුදුයි.
Tonight on First at 9, this Wednesday, the 14th of February 2024. Economic reforms. President Ranil Wickremesinghe says new regulations needed to reform the economy will be introduced with global trade integrations. Safety concerns. US Aid Administrator Samantha Powers urges Sri Lanka to address concerns about the potential impact of the Online Safety Act on freedom of expression. Tourism on the up. National app for Sri Lanka tourism to be launched. Arrivals from European markets showing progress. And health strike ends. Health trade unions calls off the 2-day strike after consensus with the health minister.
ඔබේ විශ්වාසය දිනු සෙන්සුරයින් දැන් ළඟමැති ෆාමසියෙන් ලබාගත හැක.
This is AdaDerana First at 9 with Indivari Amuata and Mahish Johnny. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
A very warm welcome. You're joining us once again at First at 9 on AdaDerana 24, and we're ready to bring you the very latest from across Sri Lanka and around the world. I'm Indivari Amuata. Good evening, Mahesh.
Good evening, Indivari. As always, there are good stories that we can actually be a little bit positive about. The country is picking up in terms of economy because we saw that tourism seems to be on the upward trend, and hopefully that it'll continue and we won't have any kind of drawbacks that'll actually hamper that particular effort of bringing in more tourists to this country.
And interestingly, also on a positive note, there is an indication that the value-added tax component will be reduced in the coming months. Plus, in international news, we see that the farming community have been, those who have been protesting for high prices for their crops have been met with tear gas, with the use of drone attacks as
Farmers protest in India. In Sri Lanka also had a similar incident where the whole unrest situation came into light because of farmers, because of certain decisions taken with regard to their crops and how it is being cultivated. But let's begin tonight's bulletin and bring you the latest on news from here at home and around the world. Now, President Ranil Wickremesinghe says that new regulations will be introduced to resuscitate the country's economy by integrating it with global trade.
Joining the national program for the distribution of free school textbooks and uniforms in Colombo, President Ranil Wickremesinghe stated that he had to go to the extent of begging for an influx of foreign aid for the country as Sri Lanka battled the economic crisis, the worst in our history.
Concurrently, Education Minister Dr. Susil Premachandra, switching tracks, said that the school timetable, which has been set back due to the COVID pandemic and the economic crisis, will be regulated back to normalcy by 2025.
The national program for the distribution of free school textbooks and uniforms was held today at St. Anthony's College, Colombo, with the participation of President Ranil Wickremesinghe and Minister of Education Dr. Susil Premachandra.
අපි ඊළඟ වාරයේ ආරම්භ කරන්නේ ප්‍රථම වාරය ලබන සඳුදා 19 වෙනිදා තමයි ආරම්භ කරන්නේ. අපි ආරම්භ කරන්නට හිටියේ ජනවාරි 2 වෙනිදා. නමුත් බොහෝ දෙනාගේ ඉල්ලීම පිට උසස් පෙළ විභාගය සති 5ක් කල් දන්වීම නිසා තමයි පෙබරවාරි 19 අපිට පටන් ගන්න සිදුුනේ. නමුත් මේ වර්ෂය අවසන් වන විට සියලු විෂය නිර්දේශ ආවරණය කළා පාසල් වාරසටහන මේ වර්ෂය අවසන්දී අවසන් කිරීමටයි සැලසුම් කළා තිබෙනවා. 2025 වර්ෂයේ සුපුරුදු පරිදි ජනවාරි මාසයේ 2 වෙනිදා වන විට පාසල් ආරම්භ කරන්නට වාරසටහන් සකස් කළා තිබෙනවා. දැන් උසස් පෙළ අවසానයි උත්තර පත්‍ර පරීක්ෂා කරනවා. අපි බලාපොරොත්තු වෙනවා මැයි ජූනි වල සාමාන්‍ය පෙළ විභාගයේ පැවැත්වීමට පෙර ආත්මෙහි ප්‍රතිඵල නිකුත් කළා සාමාන්‍ය පෙළ විභාගයේ පවත්වන්න. ඒ වගේම මේ වර්ෂයේ අවසානයේදී දෙසැම්බර් මාසය වන විට මේ වසරේම උසස් පෙළ විභාගයේ පැවැත්වීමට සීළු කටයුතු යොදලා තිබෙනවා. ඒ නිසා 2025 වන විට COVID-19 නිසා රටේ පැවතිච්ච ඒ නිසා පස්සට ගිය විභාග දෙකම අපි ඉදිරියට ගෙනීමට අවශ්‍ය පියවර අරගෙන.
මේ ආණ්ඩුව මම බාරගත් උගක් අමාරු කාලෙක. ඇත්ත වශයෙන්ම අපි ආරම්භ කරද්දී මෙහෙම නිල ඇඳුම් පොත්පත් දෙන්න පුළුවන්ද කියලාවත් හිතුවේ නෑ. මේ අවුරුද්දේ තත්ත්වය ඊට වඩා ටිකක් හොඳයි දැන්. ඒ නිසා මේ සැරෙත් දුන්නා ඉදිරියටත් කරගෙන යන්න. අපි දන්නවා මෙතන පිරුම් හර ළඟ පෙට්‍රෝල් ෂෙඩ් එක ළඟ තිබුණේ. දවසට විදුලි බලය තිබුණේ නෑ. කොහෙන්ද තෙල් හොයාගන්නේ කියලා දෙමව්පිය බලනවා. ආහාර නෑ. හරි අමාරුවෙන් අපි ගියේ. මම හිතන්නේ කවුරුවත් ඒ යුගයට ආපහු යන්න කැමතියි කියලා. මේක උනේ අපේ කාලේ. ඔබ ශිෂ්‍යයන් වෙලා ඉන්න කාලේ. මම බලන්නේ ආපහු ඔබේ අනාගතයේදී මේක නොවන විදියට ශක්තිමත් ආර්ථිකයක් හදලා දෙන්න. අපිට මේ කාලේ කරන්න ගිහින් රටවල් වලින් සල්ලි ඉල්ලන්න තිබුණා. මං අකමැත්තෙන් හෝ ගිහින් හිඟා කෑවා. ඔබට අනාගතයක් ලැබලා දෙන්න. මං හිතන්නේ ඔබ සියලු දෙනාම වැඩිහිටි වෙලා ඉන්න සමාජයක කැමතියි කියලා ආණ්ඩුව ගිහින් හිඟා ගන්න. එහෙනම් අපි ලෝක වෙළඳපොළට එකතු වෙන්න ඕනේ. අපි ඉන්දියාව ළඟ තියෙන්නේ. ඊළඟ අවුරුදු 20 දී ඉන්දියාවේ ශීඝ්‍ර දියුණුවක් ඇති වෙයි. ඒගොල්ලේ දල දේශීය නිෂ්පාදනය 8 ගුණයකින් වැඩි වෙනවා. අපි එතෙන්ට එකතු වෙලා යනවා නම් අඩු ගානේ අපි 6 ගුණයකින් හරි වැඩි වෙන්න ඕනේ. ඉතින් මේ ගැන මම අලුත් නීති ගේනවා. විශේෂයෙන්ම ආර්ථිකය පරිවර්තනයේ කිරීමේ නීතිය ගේනවා. එතනින් තමයි ඉදිරියට යන්නේ. මට ඕන හොඳ ආර්ථිකයක් මේ රට හදලා දෙන්න.
Administrator of the United States Agency for International Development, or USAID, Samantha Power, has urged President Ranil Wickremesinghe to address the concerns raised by the potential impact of the online safety bill on freedom of expression. The head of the US agency addressed this during a virtual conversation with President Wickremesinghe yesterday. A USAID statement said that Administrator Power had encouraged President Wickremesinghe to address concerns about the potential impact of the Online Safety Act on freedom of expression, as well as investments in Sri Lanka's vibrant digital economy. During the meeting, discussions also centered on the island's economic reform agenda, as well as the importance of democratic governance and a consultative legislative process. She expressed USAID's commitment to work with President Wickremesinghe on addressing difficult economic challenges, whilst also highlighting the strong support of the United States for freedom of expression and association in Sri Lanka.
Well, a Sri Lankan delegation has travelled to India in order to gain insight and knowledge into India's recent initiatives for transforming its public service qualitatively and implementing policy improvements successfully. During their stay from the 12th to the 17th of February, the 14-member delegation, led by Prime Minister Secretary Andrew Dissanayake, will seek to prioritise capacity development in Sri Lanka government institutions contributing to the nation's economic growth. The President's media division said that the delegates are expected to engage in extensive discussion with Indian institutions. The program, scheduled to be conducted at India's National Centre for Good Governance, will cover various topics including digitization, capacity development, anti-corruption measures and investment facilitation. They will also meet with key Indian officials including Minister of Foreign Affairs, Minister of State for Personnel and Principal Secretary to the Prime Minister to explore avenues for further collaborations.
Presidential Advisor on Parliamentary Affairs, Professor Ashu Marasinghe, said that he is hopeful of a reduction in the value-added tax levy, which is currently at a rate of 18% back to 15% over the next few months. He made these comments while addressing a media briefing organised at the United National Party headquarters in Sirikota. The value-added tax was increased with effect from January this year, and with the increment, the government expects to earn 1.4 trillion rupees within the year.
In a bid to raise more government revenue, value-added tax was increased by the government from 15% to 18% with effect from January 1st of this year. Along with this increment, 97 goods and services, including fuel, gas and telecommunication services, as well as several food products manufactured using locally cultivated grains, locally manufactured coconut milk, and certain dairy products, both locally produced and previously exempt from VAT, fell under the tax umbrella. However, items including medicines, educational services, public passenger transport services, and food products such as infant milk powder, locally manufactured rice, and bread continue to be exempted from VAT. By increasing the VAT, the government expects to generate an income of about 1,400 billion during the year 2024. Following its increment, mass-scale objections were raised by the public towards the government, citing that the tax burden imposed has made livelihood unbearable. Further, economic experts warned that the VAT increment would increase production costs, contributing to a rise in goods and services, which would eventually lead to a low consumer demand. However, President Ranil Wickremesinghe assured that steps will be taken to revise the VAT once revenue targets are met. Meanwhile, speaking to the media today, Presidential Advisor on Parliamentary Affairs Professor Ashu Marasinghe revealed that the government is hopeful of revising the VAT soon.
මුලින්ම 18ක් වැඩි කරපු VAT බදු 15කට ගේන්න පුළුවන් වෙයි කියලා ජනාධිපතිතුමත් විශ්වාස කරනවා. අපි විශ්වාස කරනවා ඉදිරි මාස කිහිපයක තුල ඒක කරන්න පුළුවන් වෙයි. අපි විශ්වාස කරනවා අප්‍රේල් මයි වෙනකොට මේ කටයුතු ටික අපිට කරගන්න පුළුවන් වෙයි කියලා. එතකොට මධ්‍යම පන්තියටත් දැන් තියෙන අමාරුකම් වලින් සමහරක් දේවල් කළමනාකරණය කරගන්න පුළුවන්.
In one of our headline stories, the strike action, which was initiated by members affiliated to 72 health trade unions yesterday, was called off today after a second day of strikes that ended with a discussion with the Minister of Health, Dr. Ramesh Patirana.
And in a separate development, the All Ceylon Nurses Union launched a protest in front of the Ministry of Health this afternoon, demanding the disturbance, availability and transport allowance or DAT of 35,000 rupees.
The strike launched yesterday by a collective of 72 health trade unions demanding an equivalent allowance to the DAT allowance afforded to doctors of 35,000 rupees continued today for a second day. This move was initiated after an impasse in talks with the Ministry of Finance. Accordingly, health trade unions representing a wide range of health sector professionals, including radiology and laboratory technicians, pharmacists and public health inspectors engaged in the strike today. Patients continue to remain inconvenienced as a result of the lack of personnel in hospitals. Owing to the continuous strike, measures were taken to deploy over 1,200 army personnel at state hospital premises island-wide to ensure uninterrupted health services. As the Cooks Association also joined the strike, army officers had to undertake the culinary requirement of the patients of the Colombo National Hospital today. However, doctors and nurses, excluding the Government Nursing Officers Association, continue to provide medication amidst the strike. Patients were observed purchasing drugs from state pharmacies as drugs were not dispensed in state hospitals due to the strike. Last evening, a special Gazette notification was issued declaring the provision of healthcare as an essential public service. Per the Gazette notification, all service, work or labour of any description whatsoever, necessary or required to be done in connection with the maintenance and the reception, care, feeding and treatment of patients in hospitals, nursing homes, dispensaries and other similar institutions are considered essential services.
තව දවස් දෙක තුනක් ඔය ස්ට්‍රයික් එක වෙන්න ඉඩ ඇරියොත් 90%ක්වත් අඩු තමයි සේවයට වාර්තා කරන තත්ත්වයක් උදා වෙනවා. වැඩ වර්ජන රැල්ල නවත්තන්න පුළුවන් එකම ක්‍රමය ලැබ් වලින් සහ වෙනත් කර්තව්‍යයන් ඔක්කොම පුද්ගලිකංශයට වාර දීම. ගැසට් නිවේදන නිකුත් කළ අත්‍යවශ්‍ය සේවා කරලා ඔතනින් නවතින්න එපා. 80 වැඩ වර්ජකයන් වගේ 2024 වැඩ වර්ජකයන් ගෙදර තියලා මේ සෞඛ්‍ය ක්ෂේත්‍රය සාර්ථක කරගෙන සුවසේවාවක් බවට පත් කරගන්න වෛද්‍යවරුන්ට උදව් කරන්න කියලා මං ඉල්ලා සිටිනවා.
ප්‍රායෝගික නොවන සටන් පාටත් එක්ක එනකොට සාධාරණීකරණය කරන්න බැරි ඉල්ලීම් එක්ක එනකොට මේ සටන දියාරු වෙලා යනවා. මේ සටන නිකම්ම පරදින සටනක් බවට පත් වෙනවා. රටේ මිනිස්සු කිව්වේ වෛද්‍යවරුන්ට මේක දෙන්න නැතුව වෙන කාට දෙන්නද කියලා. වෛද්‍යවරු රැක ගන්න නැතුව කවුද රැකගන්නේ කියලා. හැබැයි මේ මොහොතේදී අපි දකින්නේ නැහැ ජනතාවගෙන් එහෙම සහයෝගයක් මේ කණ්ඩායම වලට ලැබෙනවා.
In the meantime, the Public Services United Nurses Union added that President Wickremesinghe has advised to take measures to address the issues pertaining to the nursing services.
එතුමා මේ ප්‍රශ්න පිළිබඳව ශේ සැලකිල්ලක් දක්වලා මේවා කඩිනමින් විසඳන්න අවශ්‍ය පියවර ගන්න කියන එක නිලධාරීන්ට උපදෙස් දුන්නා. හිතකාරී පැත්තෙන් වඩා සාර්ථකයි. හැමතැනම නිලධාරීන් වැඩ කරනවා.
In a separate development, a protest was launched this afternoon by the All Ceylon Nurses Union demanding the DAT allowance. Protesters marched from the Colombo National Hospital towards the Ministry of Health. The protest, however, later dispersed following a discussion with the Health Secretary. A short while ago, the 72 health trade unions agreed to call off their ongoing strike following a discussion with Minister of Health, Dr. Ramesh Patirana.
Well, opposition leader Sajith Premadasa says that his party is ready to empower the estate community under a Samagi Jana Balavekya government headed by him. Addressing an event at the SJB party headquarters, the opposition leader said that a presidential task force would be established to address the issues pertaining to the socio-economic and infrastructure development of the upcountry and low-country estate communities.
Meeting with opposition leader Sajith Premadasa and political parties representing the estate community was held today at the Samagi Jana Balavekya headquarters in Ethulkote. During the meeting, an agreement was signed between the SJB and the political parties representing the estate community to empower the estate community as entrepreneurs. The meeting was also attended by the leader of the Tamil Progressive Alliance, Mano Ganesan, leader of the Workers' National Front, Palani Thingambaran, and V. Radhakrishnan, representing the Kandurata Janata Perumana.
රජයක් යටතේ ජනාධිපති කාර්ය සාධක බලකායක් වෙනමම ස්ථාපනය කරලා උඩරට පහතරට වතු ප්‍රජාව මුහුණ දෙන ආර්ථික සමාජීය සංවර්ධන දේශපාලන ගැටලු ඇතුළු යටිතල ශාස්ත්‍රයේ තිබෙනා වූ ගැටලු ප්‍රශ්නවලට විසඳුම් ලබා දෙන සම්මුතියකට අද අපි ගිවිසුම්ගත වුණා. වතු ප්‍රජාවට භූමියේ අයිතිය, වගා භූමියේ අයිතිය, තමන්ගේ නිවසක අයිතිය, ඒ වගේම වතු ශාස්ත්‍රයේ වතු ව්‍යවසායකින් හැටියට කටයුතු කිරීමේ ඒ ඉමහත් අවස්ථාව අපි උදා කරන්නට අදහස් කරනවා.
Leader of the United Republican Front, Partly Champika Ranawaka, says that as a party of the economic recovery process, measures should be taken to recover bad loans in the banking sector amounting to approximately 1.3 trillion rupees. Meanwhile, in response to allegations by the opposition on rumours of postponing elections again, State Minister of Finance Ranjit Siambalapitiya says that elections will be held in the mandated period and funds will be allocated for any elections in 2025 via the next budget.
දැන් පළාත් පාලන මැතිවරණය කල් දැම්මේ සල්ලි නැහැ කියලා. දැන් ඊළඟ මැතිවරණයටත් මේ සූත්‍රයම ආදේශ කරන්න පුළුවන්. ඒ නිසා මේක බරපතල තත්වයක්.
ජනාධිපති ක්‍රමය අහෝසි කිරීම පිළිබඳව මොකද්ද ඔබතුමාගේ ස්ථාවරය?
මේ ජනාධිපතිතුමා පාර්ලිමේන්තුවට ප්‍රතිපත්ති ප්‍රකාශන 3ක් ඉදිරිපත් කළා තියෙනවා. 3න් එකක හරි යෝක තිබුණාද? මේ දේශපාලන තක්කඩි කමක් වෙනුවෙන් කරන යෝජනාවක්.
පැහැදිලිවම 2024 අයවැය ලේඛනය තුළ මේ වර්ෂය සඳහා මැතිවරණ වෙනුවෙන් බිලියන 10ක් වෙන් කරලා තියෙනවා. ඒ නිසා නියම කාලවල මැතිවරණ තියන්න කිසිම ප්‍රශ්නයක් නැහැ. ඒනවා 2025 මැතිවරණයක් තියෙනවා නම් පුළුවන් ඒකටත් අපි 5 අයවැය ලේඛන තුළ මුදල් වෙන් කරනවා.
ඉලෙක්ෂන් කමිෂන් එකෙන් කියනවා සල්ලි වෙන් කරලා තියෙන්නේ ජනාධිපතිවරණයට විතරයි. පාර්ලිමේන්තු මැතිවරණයක් තියෙන්නේ ඊළඟ අවුරුද්දේ. එතකොට සල්ලි ඉල්ල ගන්න පුළුවන් වෙයි කියලා. ඉල්ල ගන්න පුළුවන් වෙයි කියන කතාව කොච්චර දුරට අපිට විශ්වාස කරන්න පුළුවන්ද නැද්ද කියලා.
ජනාධිපති ඡන්දේ තියෙනවද නැද්ද කියලා තීන්දුව ගන්න ජනාධිපති නෙමෙයි. යාට බලයක් නැහැ හැම කියන්නේ. මේ අවුරුද්දේ ජූලි මාසේ 22 වෙනිදායින් පස්සේ මැතිවරණ කොමිසමට බලය එනවා. ඡන්දේ පවත්වන දිනේ තීරණය කරනවා.
බිලියන 2000කින් ආණ්ඩුවේ ආදායම වැඩි කළා තියෙනවා. කාගෙන්ද මේව අරන් තියෙන්නේ? ජනතාව. වෙන වචන වලින් කියනවා නම් සෑම පුරවැසියෙක්ම රුපියල් ලක්ෂයක් මේ කාලය ඇතුළත වැඩියෙන් බදු ගෙවලා තියෙනවා ආණ්ඩුවට. තවත් රුපියල් ලක්ෂයක් හැම පුරවැසියෙක්ම අහිමි කරගෙන තියෙන ආදායම හැටියට. නිසා මේ ඡන්දේ දෙනකොට දෙන ඡන්දයට බොහොම බලගතු වටිනාකමක් තියෙනවා. ඡන්දේ හරියට දුන්නේ නැත්නම් ලක්ෂ 2 නෙමෙයි ඒක ලක්ෂ 10 15 වෙන්න පුළුවන් මේ අර්බුදයේ ඉදිරියට යන්නේ. මේ බැංකු පද්ධතියේ ක්‍රියාවලිය බැලුවොත් එහෙම දැනට බැංකු පද්ධතියේ අක්‍රිය ණය බැංකු 30ක පමණ බිලියන 1387ක් මේ ණය ප්‍රශස්ත කරන සාකච්ඡාවට ආපු හැටියෙන් මම යෝජනාවක් කළා. මේ බැංකුවල ණය පොලු කාරයින්ගේ ලයිස්තුව පළවෙනි 25 දෙනාගේ ලයිස්තුව දෙන්න කියලා. ඒක ප්‍රතික්ෂේප කරලා අපට ලියුමක් කිව්වා. නමුත් මා සතුව ලයිස්තුව තියෙනවා. ප්‍රබල ඇමතිවරු හිටපු ඇමතිවරු ප්‍රබල ව්‍යාපාරිකයෝ හොඳ ව්‍යවසායදායකයෝ කියන අය විශාල පිරිසක් මේ බැංකු පොලු ලයිස්තුවේ ඉන්නවා. බැංකු පොලු කාරයින්ගෙන් ණය ආය කර ගැනීමට සක්‍රිය ක්‍රියාමාර්ගයක් ගත යුතුයි.
Welcome back to the news. We take you to your business stories. Chairman of Sri Lanka's Tourism Promotion Bureau, Chalaka Gajabahu, says Sri Lanka's first ever national level app for tourism, assisted by the Asian Development Bank, is expected to be launched in March this year.
Well, he made these comments while addressing a media briefing in Colombo to provide a brief on upcoming events with regard to Sri Lanka tourism.
Concurrently, Director General of the Sri Lanka Tourism Promotion Bureau, Nalin Pereira, revealed that arrivals from European markets are showing steady progress and added that tourism earnings will equal the earnings from foreign remittances by the end of the first quarter of this year.
As of yesterday, at February 13th, for the first 13 days, we have done 98,455 tourist arrivals to Sri Lanka, culminating a number of 306,708, where we ended up January with 208,253. So it's going is very good, but then we can't relax right now. So we need to go even harder. With Asian Development Bank, we are now finalizing, it's almost in the final stage of creating the first ever national app for Sri Lanka, which is with the ADB along with the Sri Lanka Tourism Promotion Bureau, which now about 75% of the work is completed, which will be hopefully, again, that also will coincide with our global launch somewhere in March. But I think the app will be launched before the global campaign.
What is more encouraging is if you really look at the source markets that we are working with, the European sector has shown a very steady progress. Our main source markets are India, Russia, United Kingdom, Germany, China, and France, Poland, and Australia, and United States coming, and Netherlands coming into the first 10, which is a very encouraging thing, because what we have experienced by analyzing some of the statistics that we have, any European visitor who comes to the country generally spends a long duration in Sri Lanka.
9 to 10 days.
9 to 10 days. Or sometimes even extending to 2 weeks or even month, because their requirement that they come to Sri Lanka as a destination is quite different to some of the other tourists that we welcome to the country. 2024 is going to be a very positive year, and I'm sure you would have seen some numbers. The tourism is almost touching the foreign exchange earnings the country has been generating the first few months. So basically we are almost there, and I'm sure by
January,
the first quarter,
over
800 billion, and by the first quarter we should be able to either equal the revenues that we are generating from foreign employment and foreign exchange through tourism. And in addition to that, during the you will see many international brands opening their hotels for guests. They are almost completing their projects, and you will see more inventory adding into the Sri Lanka tourism. I think the much needed thing was our domestic air connectivity to places like Jaffna, Trinco, and Batiklo. I'm happy to announce, like with effect from today, we have resumed Jaffna direct flight from Ratmalana, and as well as Bati and Trinco from Ratmalana and from those destinations.
Even if we put something positive on social media, even if I put a positive message, the amount of negative messages that comes out in those messages, what they are saying, what's the point in getting more tourists more than Maldives? Well, we are not earning enough money. Come on, you have to face reality. You're not going to do that overnight. We had to rebuild the brand. Don't forget, we had a negative impression about Sri Lanka, and we are not going to achieve $500 per day with overnight. And we have a clear plan, and we are showing the results, and it's going to be step by step. You can't go to the moon overnight.
And in markets today, the Colombo Bourse closed lower as a result of losses in consumer staples and material stocks. The all share price index closed 0.24% lower at 10,531.48, while the more liquid S&P SL20 index gained 0.06% higher at 3,024.26. Trading volume on the benchmark index fell to 25.4 million from 28.7 in the last session. Equity market turnover fell to 695.1 million rupees from the last session's record of 711.3 million. The banking sector, the food, beverage and tobacco sector were the top contributors to turnover. Foreign investors in the meantime were net sellers, offloading stocks worth 104.1 million rupees, while domestic investors were net buyers purchasing shares worth 659.1 million.
Well, up next, Trisha Pires from Capital Alliance with some thoughts on the current status of the country's economy in our next segment, Sri Lanka's economic outlook.
In economic news this week, interest rates dipped sharply, reaching single-digit levels for the first time since March 2022, with the 3-month T-bill reducing by 117 basis points to 9.79%, while the 12-month Treasury bill fell by 71 basis points to 10.02%. The long end of the yield curve also saw a steep fall at the auction this week, reducing by 227 and 176 basis points, respectively, for the 3-year and the 5-year bonds. These movements now point to a normalized upward yield curve prevailing once again in the market. This reduction in interest rates has been in large part due to lower borrowing requirements by the government, with the fiscal situation also continuing to improve substantially owing to higher taxation, with the government noting that revenue collections for the month of January has exceeded the target by 55 billion rupees. With this reduction in rates, we believe that bank deposit rates could see a further reduction in the coming weeks, with the AWPLR also reducing to 11.83% in the past week. On the exchange rate front, the rupee has continued to strengthen against the dollar from 316 to 313 rupees against the dollar. This has in large part been due to improved dollar inflows, while imports have remained somewhat constrained.
In a world's first, Japan auctioned sovereign climate transition bonds today, although the bonds met with slightly weaker than expected demand. Climate transition bonds are a relatively new class of bonds which aim to fund shifts by companies or, in the case, a government, to have a lesser impact on the environment.
Japan's sale of 800 billion yen or $5.3 billion in 10-year transition bonds was the first in Prime Minister Fumio Kishida's plan to sell 20 trillion yen of climate bonds over the next decade to help the nation with its goal of cutting greenhouse gases to zero by 2050. Climate transition bonds are distinct from green bonds, where the proceeds are earmarked for a specific project or are focused on the profile of the issuer. The proceeds are expected to go towards projects such as low-cost wind power generators and airplanes that use alternative fuels. The proceeds are expected to go towards projects such as low-cost wind power generators and airplanes that use alternative fuels. Japan's finance ministry plans to sell 800 billion yen of 5-year transition bonds on February 27, which will be followed by 1.4 trillion yen of transition bonds in the fiscal year starting in April.
Well, in the United Kingdom, inflation remained unchanged at 4%, surprising economists who had predicted a small increase to 4.2%. The figures show the first monthly fall in food prices for more than 2 years, giving some relief to the Bank of England.
In a boost for the Bank of England, British consumer price inflation unexpectedly held steady at an annual rate of 4% in January, defying forecasts for it to rise. Inflation is expected to fall further in the coming months, paving the way for the Bank of England to start cutting borrowing costs from their 16-year high. The stable British inflation data followed a stronger than expected increase in price growth in the United States announced a day earlier. The British Central Bank, meanwhile, fears rapid wage growth, which makes up much of the inflation rate in the services sector, could add more inflationary pressure across the economy. The sterling weakened against the dollar and the euro immediately after the inflation data was published.
And the Sri Lankan rupee slightly appreciated against the US dollar, with the buying rate dropping to 308.26 from 308.58, while the selling rate reduced to 318.16 from 318.46, or rather 16 to 46. Let's take a look at the day's rupee exchange rates today. Well, Sri Lanka won in the ODI against Afghanistan, and Pathum Nissanka has scored his 5th ODI. That wraps up tonight's edition of First at 9. I'm Indiva Yamwa.
Mahesh, Johnny, have a good night.